Welcome to NFL Fantasy Live. I'm Marcus Grant alongside Cynthia Freeland, Kimmy Checks, and Adam Rank. Big show for you today. This is NFL Fantasy Live presented by Hellsberg Diamonds. And, we want to hear from you on this show. We want your rankings for Week 13. Send us your top 10 rankings for quarterback and running back for the week. You can send it in to us, pause the show, put together your list, and then send them in to us at nflfantasy@nfl.com. Do it right now, and you might have a chance to see them on the show later on this week. So we want to get you involved. That's what we're trying to do here, is make this thing a little bit more interactive. All right. This is the week that never ends. Yes, it goes on and on, my friends. Week 12 is still in effect because there is one more game you see there. Ravens and Steelers tomorrow, 3:40 Eastern time on NBC. This was moved, obviously, a couple of times because of a number of positive COVID-19 tests on both sides. Meanwhile, next week, the Washington football team playing the Steelers. That game will be the first part of a Monday night doubleheader. You've got the Ravens and Cowboys game moving to Tuesday night. All right, with that, it is time for, on Wednesdays, we play fantasy. Now, Regina George and the Plastics might wear pink. We're busy here setting lineups. We're going to go around the horn, give you some projections for a handful of players in tomorrow night's Ravens-Steelers game for those of you who have your week hanging in the balance. So first up, Adam Rank, how good do you think Big Ben's going to be tomorrow?
Well, I think it'll be pretty good, and I'm excited to see this game. It's kind of like the play-in game on a Wednesday in March. I don't know, maybe this game will be played in March. That's fine, but I like Ben Roethlisberger going up against the Baltimore Ravens. I have him projected right around 19 fantasy points. He's had over 25 in 2 out of his last 3 games. He's had at least 2 touchdown passes in 5 consecutive games. It's only just been a question of if he is getting the yardage or not. I think there'll be an opportunity for him in this one, so I like dialing him up this week.
All right, Kimmy, how about Marquise Hollywood Brown?
All right, I have them projected around 9 fantasy points, and to be honest, this is a very generous projection. I'm really working on my kindness to close out 2020, so I'm going to start with Marquise Hollywood Brown. Now, he's had fewer than 10 fantasy points in 5 straight games and is averaging just under 9 fantasy points this season. Back in Week 8, when the Ravens faced the Steelers, he put up 7 fantasy points, which shouldn't be surprising because of his performance all season long, paired with Pittsburgh only allowing 1 top 20 fantasy wide receiver in the last 4 games. So 9 points. Let's see if he can get there.
Hey, Cynthia, back to the Pittsburgh side. What are you thinking about Juju Smith-Schuster?
So I was going to play off of Kimmy's niceness thing, but I don't have a nice projection for Juju Smith-Schuster, although it is close to 9 points. I have 8.9 points projected, 4 receptions, 49 yards. Remember, way back last week, Juju Smith-Schuster did appear on the injury report, which leads me to believe that he could not be 100%. Now that, combined with the fact that Baltimore allowed the 4th fewest fantasy points per game to wide receivers this season, means to me that it could possibly be the other receivers that benefit more from Ben as opposed to Juju Smith-Schuster in this one.
Speaking of the other receivers, I'm going to look at Chase Claypool, and I'm going to put him at 16 fantasy points. He has 8 touchdowns this season, which is a product of the fact that the Steelers like going to him down near the goal line. So even if the matchup is tough, there is some touchdown upside there. He's had 8 or more targets in 4 straight, 13 or more fantasy points in 6 of his last 7 games, and really has become kind of the number 2 receiver in that Pittsburgh offense. The number 1 receiver, though, Adam Rank, is Deontay Johnson. What are you looking at for him?
Well, I have a conservative estimate for just 14 fantasy points, which isn't a monster game, but he's had at least 14 in 3 consecutive contests, 10 targets in 6 of his last 7, and he's really getting the yardage, even though, the last time he played the Baltimore Ravens, not great. He had less than 2 fantasy points, but I really do believe this is an opportunity. I like the Steelers offense on Wednesday. There's a lot of quirky things going on, and I really anticipate the Steelers coming out and throwing the ball pretty well. So if you've been waiting for Deontay Johnson, I think you're going to be rewarded.
The Ravens like to run the football a lot, and running backs Mark Ingram and J.K. Dobbins did not travel today with the team because of the 10 days of isolation required. But both can fly tomorrow and can play if they don't have any positive tests. So, Kimmy, what do you see from Mark Ingram in this one?
I only have 5 projected fantasy points for Mark Ingram, which is a little under his season average. He's 70th amongst all running backs. I think if J.K. Dobbins can play, J.K. Dobbins is going to be the main featured back over Mark Ingram. The Pittsburgh Steelers are allowing the second fewest fantasy points to running backs this season. I just don't think it's a good matchup. They've missed practice because of COVID. Lots of question marks here, so just a conservative 5 for Mark Ingram.
On the other side, Cynthia, James Conner is not going to play. So what do you think about his replacement, Benny Snell Jr.?
Okay, so I have 8 fantasy points projected, which is double his average. His 3.75 is his season average. He did have 11, slightly over 11, without James Conner since 2019. But this is not the matchup where the end zone is really their friend. In other words, Baltimore's only allowed 4 rushing touchdowns to running backs this season. That's tied for second fewest in the league. Based on who I project to be playing for that front, I do think the run game is going to be very difficult for Benny Snell to find the end zone, meaning I think 8 points is about right where you're going to project him and be happy with him to have.
All right, much like Jack Palance in the 80s channeling Mr. Ripley, I'm going to ask if you believe it or not. These are the scenarios you need to see on the field this week to get a fantasy win. So Jack needs 26 points from the Steelers D and Justin Tucker combined. Rank, do you believe it or not?
Oh, yeah, you got this, Jack. Congratulations. On to week 13.
Next up, Sean says he needs Deontay Johnson to have 4 more points than Ben Roethlisberger. Kimmy, is that going to go down for Sean?
I believe it. You just heard Adam Rank hyping up Deontay Johnson. He said he thinks they're going to pass the ball well. The Ravens are tough against quarterbacks. So, yes, I believe in you. Deontay Johnson, huge game. More than 4 points than Big Ben.
Jake, trying to believe in the power of positive thinking here, says, nah, I need Ebron to drop 78.22 points. Very specific, Cynthia. Is it going to happen?
You know, it's going to be one of those things where it's 78.21, and then we're going to have to put him on again tomorrow with some improbable loss there. But, 78.21, that's kind of where I would project Ebron to be. Just missing
That'd be the most heartbreaking fantasy loss ever. You need that many points, you come up 0.01 short. All right, anyway, from the make-believe to the fantasy reality that went down last night in Philadelphia.
Russ looks. Now he's going to let it fly. Got a man out there. Metcalf makes the catch at the 5. He's down at the 1-yard line. Nobody throws the deep ball like Russell Wilson. Russ is going to lay it up over the top to David Moore, who makes the catch. It is in. Touchdown, Seahawks. On 3rd and 13, and Wentz is going to go down. He gets hammered.
That's just a poor job by the offensive line.
Another terrible possession. Wentz stops, throws to the end zone. It's intercepted. No Eagle receiver was anywhere nearby. The handoff inside to Carson. He finds a hole across the 10, down to the 5. He's driving. He's in. Touchdown, Seahawks. Chris Carson. Holy smoke, carried half of the Eagles defense on his back and scores.
Steve Rabel with a holy catfish. It's the Monday night recap in primetime and off-peak performances, starting with those who shined under the bright lights. Adam Rank, who you got?
Well, I'm going to start with DK Metcalf, talking about a believe it or not situation. I went into Monday night in my league of record, and I wasn't playing Mark DiPaolo. I was playing some other guy. I was down 13. He had Chris Carson. I had DK and Dallas Goedert, and these guys both came through. Obviously, DK, close to 30 fantasy points, targeted 13 times. That kind of took away from Tyler Lockett, who did not have a great game. But I will tell you that going into week 13, they've got the New York Giants. Now, last week, they put James Bradbury on A.J. Green, so I expect James Bradbury to be on DK. I'm still starting him, but what I'm trying to tell you is you need to start Tyler Lockett against the Giants this week.
Okay, well, I'm definitely starting Dallas Goedert against anyone ever again for the rest of the season because his 20.5 fantasy points against the Seahawks was the most, not just amongst tight ends this week, but also both that a tight end has scored against Seattle this season. No other tight end has reached 15. I really think it's an interesting note on how they're going to use him going forward because third down and ultimately first and second down have been a problem for Carson Wentz. So if there is a change at quarterback, I think that does nothing but increase the opportunity for Goddard going forward. So for me, I'm a really big fan. And also, catfish are very ugly. Just thought I'd throw that in there.
Yes, but they are very delicious. I will kick off the off-peak performances with Russell Wilson, and Russ has been cooking some lighter meals lately. Fewer than 15 fantasy points in 2 of his last 3 games. Part of it is that he's not throwing the ball quite as much. He had been averaging 37 pass attempts per game over the first 9 contests for the Seahawks. That number has dropped to fewer than 30 pass attempts per game in the last 2 weeks. Seahawks trying to run the football more, and Russell's fantasy production has taken a hit as part of it.
I projected 27 points for Russell Wilson and 20 points for Miles Sanders, but they both let me down. The matchup was there for Miles Sanders against the Seahawks, but he underwhelmed. He had 6 rushes for 15 yards and 2 receptions for 7 yards, finishing the night with only 6 fantasy points. This was his lowest fantasy performance of the season. Now, though he is out-touching Boston Scott is actually averaging more fantasy points per game than Miles Sanders since week 10. So it's kind of an interesting situation happening there in the running game for the Eagles.
I just want Miles Sanders to eat more. Just give him some more opportunities. That would be great. Let's move to Waiver Wire, where a friendly reminder that with tomorrow's game, they move the waiver claim period to Friday morning. So that's when you find out if you got the guys that you put your claims in for. So you have a little bit of extra time to weigh some of your decisions as we look at our Waiver Wire wonders for the week. Rank, who do you like?
Well, I'm going to go with Kiki QT because with Will Fuller being suspended for the remainder of the season, that means there's a 21% target share, a 30% air yard share now available with him not there. And of course, QT is kind of, starting to show up here and there. We do some of that, helps no ones for him and things like that. The Texans have been throwing the ball a lot. 62% of their plays have been passes this season, and I expect to see an uptick for him. And I also expected to see it from Duke Johnson. He's probably not available on your waiver wire, but I look at Duke Johnson being very valuable as a receiver out of the backfield as well.
So I'm looking at the old man, the bearded one, the guy who makes the best post-game sound that I've heard all season long, pretty much. Ryan Fitzpatrick, who's available in almost 70% available in almost 79% of NFL.com fantasy leagues. I think you should play him this week against Cincinnati because as of right now, you're going to want to kind of figure out your situation going into the playoffs, where you need a quarterback. Doesn't look like Tua is going to play for at least another few weeks, so go get yourself some insurance with Ryan Fitzpatrick. Again, the remaining schedule isn't the best. Cincinnati, and then is a great one, but Kansas City, New England, and Vegas. This could be an opportunity, though, to kind of skunk your opponent, right? So don't let him be available for anyone else to take.
This magic is back. Hey, everybody, hide your chains. Debo coming. Debo Samuel came back in a big way on Sunday. 11 catches, 133 yards. But don't let that reception number fool you. Debo Samuel really is an extension of the running game. And we always want parts of a Kyle Shanahan running game. He's had multiple games this year with negative air yards, but incredible yards after the catch, just because they want to get the football in his hands. And so regardless of the matchup, believe that Kyle Shanahan and this offense will find ways to get Debo Samuel involved, and just the number of opportunities he's getting makes it worth having him on your roster.
Marcus, I love Debo Samuel. I also love Nelson Aguilar. And even with all these dominant performances the last few weeks, he's still available in almost 70% of NFL.com leagues. And he was only started in 18% in week 12. Now he's had double-digit fantasy points in 6 of the last 8 games and 14-plus points in 5 of the last 8. Now, the Raiders have the Jets on Sunday, which is a huge matchup for Nelson Aguilar and all the other wideouts on that Vegas team, since the Jets are allowing the 6th most fantasy points to wideouts this season. So if you grab Nelson Aguilar, get him into your flex spot.
So now let's go around the horn and rank our top 3 favorite waiver options of the week. Adam, rank who you got.
Well, just by doing due diligence, I would see if Debo Samuel was available. And if he is, that would be the guy that I would add. But I'm thinking it's more likely you're going to end up with Kiki QT. And, of course, Damian Harris is another guy. If he's there, great, pick him up. But I think that Frank Gore is probably the guy. And he's actually somebody who's been getting a lot of run with this Adam Gase offense, which is surprising to me.
Frank Gore makes the list of mine later on in the show. You guys have to stay tuned for that. I love Nelson Aguilar, number 1, then Debo Samuel at 2, and Phillip Rivers at 3 if you need a streaming quarterback.
Okay, so I went and looked on my leagues to make sure, and I couldn't get those guys. So I had to get Gabriel Davis at number 1. If John Brown's out, you want to use Gabriel Davis. That's a great one for daily plays as well. Then Ryan Fitzpatrick, and then Cam Akers if he is somehow available. He was in my league, so maybe he is in yours as well.
I like that Gabriel Davis pick, by the way. That's pretty spicy. I'm going to go with Deebo Samuel at number 1, Nelson Aguilar at number 2 for a bounce-back game against the Metropolitans. And number 3, take the chance, see if Damian Harris is there because he's got a pretty steady workload in New England. All right, so since we're adding folks, that means we have to be subtracting people. Adam Rank, who are you making waves with this week?
Well, I will be parting ways with Matt Ryan. And obviously right now I've been running with 2 quarterbacks this season just to make sure, you never know. I mean, like this week is still continuing. So it's probably still too soon to release your backup quarterback, but I don't anticipate playing him. When you look at the upcoming schedule, he's got the Saints. That's a sit. The Chargers, okay, that's a fine matchup, but then he's got the Buccaneers, don't like it. And on the road at Kansas City, which to me is kind of a problem. So I think that Matt Ryan, especially without Julio Jones, there's no use in even having him on your roster right now.
Okay, so this one's a little spicy, but I'm parting ways with Derek Carr. Yes, I understand he has the Jets this week who are giving up a ton of fantasy points to wide receivers. Both Josh Jacobs banged up. I'm a little nervous. I'm also a bit nervous because the Jets defense, I know it's going to sound a little nuts, but they kind of figure out these risk-it-biscuit teams that Carr has been playing on, especially with no Josh Jacobs. So for me, I'm looking ahead, and I hate his schedule beyond that. Indianapolis, Chargers, and then Miami. So for me, I don't want anything to do with Indianapolis the next week after, so I'm looking away this week, and I'm just going to nice clean break right here, right now.
Sadly, I'm about to pour a little bit out for Jonnu Smith. I love the guy at the start of the season, but it has gone bad lately. 7 straight games with 40 or fewer receiving yards. He's become 4th in target share on the Titans since week 5. Saw 0 targets in week 12. Right now, the Titans passing game has moved on from Jonnu Smith, and so I'm going to have to move on from Jonnu Smith as well.
I have to move on from Cam Newton, the former MVP. I'm sad about it, but it is what it is. This was his 2nd game with fewer than 4 fantasy points this season. He put up only 3.9 versus the Cardinals in week 12. We understand he has a huge rushing upside, but he's not throwing the ball, right? He's only had 4 passing touchdowns and 9 interceptions this season. Tough remaining schedule. So I'm sorry, Cam, you are no longer on my squad.
Get your popcorn ready. We raise the curtain on another showing of Overreaction Theater. It's where we hilariously overreact to the things we saw on Sunday, because obviously those things are what a player is going to do exactly the same way for the rest of the season. There will be no alterations in those performances. So we will start with you, Kimmy. Antonio Gibson has been fantastic. He is a first-round fantasy draft pick in 2021.
This isn't the craziest thing I've ever heard. And though he might be a first-round pick, I do expect him to be a top 15 pick in 2021. Quite the upgrade from his 7th-round ADP in 2020. Now, it was almost 37 fantasy points versus Dallas on Thanksgiving, came from 115 yards and 3 rushing touchdowns. That's not his first time in the end zone. He's had 5 straight games with at least 1 touchdown this season. As of now, he's currently sitting as a fantasy running back number 5. So good on you, Antonio Gibson.
Good on you indeed. All right, Cynthia. Derrick Henry had 16 rushing touchdowns last season. He's going to blow that out of the water this year by at least 4 touchdowns.
You know what? He has 12 right now. That's the 2nd most in the NFL. And it is very, very easy to see how he would get to at least 16. And then you go even higher than that. Yeah, I think that it's very likely that he could have at least 18 quite easily. I understand that's crazy because there's only 4 games left, but look at who those games are. Cleveland, Jacksonville, Detroit, that's, where I'm from, and Green Bay. All of those are very generous to opposing running backs, which means Derrick Henry could easily have at least 6 more touchdowns. So maybe not 20 touchdowns, but I think 18 is very possible.
Derrick Henry laughs in the face of regression. All right, Rank. Younghoe Koo. Believe it, a kicker. He is a league winner.
Yeah, what are we doing? I thought this was Overreaction Theater. This is Underreaction Theater, because this is absolutely the case. This guy's a stud. Like, he's nailing all of his kicks. He is perfect. He is a perfect 6 for 6 from 50 yards. And you think it's hot? It's a hot take to talk about kickers or whatnot. Realize this. Since week 8, Falcons kicker Younghoe Koo has had more fantasy points per game than DeAndre Hopkins, Calvin Ridley, Aaron Jones, Kareem Hunt. So yes, this guy is a league winner. But let me tell you something. This is not an overreaction. And I even put this online on Sunday. But let me tell you something right now. Tyreek Hill just scored another touchdown. Right now, as we're talking, right now, just scored another touchdown.
Okay, that's crazy talk, but he did have 3 catches for about 75 yards while you were talking about young Wei Koo. Look, what Tyreek Hill did on Sunday was phenomenal. In fact, going back to 2002, that was the second highest score by a non-quarterback in fantasy football. Very nearly 58 fantasy points. He had 39 of them before the end of the first quarter. He is currently the wide receiver 1 in fantasy and has already set a career high with 13 touchdowns, still with a handful of games to go. I know we love Tyreek Hill. I know we talk about how great he is, but somehow we might still not be giving him enough credit because of the way he has played so far this year. All right. So now let's go on and be some Debbie Downers about some of the guys who did not perform so well in Week 12. And Kimmy, Kyler Murray, he is driving the struggle bus, and he's no longer a fantasy MVP.
Okay, stop it, you guys. This is his first game this season with fewer than 20 fantasy points. Like, we're fine. He was nursing a shoulder injury, and he may not be 100%, but that does not mean he's still not one of the best fantasy quarterbacks this season. Now, we've seen a decline from his 29-point fantasy average the first 9 games of the season, but there is nothing better as a fantasy quarterback for his rushing upside, so please do not be silly and doubt starting Kyler Murray. He's going to be fine, everybody.
All right, Cynthia, you talked about Derek Carr a little bit earlier. The Raiders' offense is just a liability for the fantasy playoffs.
Well, I said it once, I'll say it again. Look at what happened last week in a very clutch matchup against it. He had 0.6 fantasy points. That ranked 32nd among quarterbacks. That was a career low. I understand that it's not usual for him to have 3 fumbles lost, 4 career giveaways, whatever, 4 a career high 4 giveaways. Not normal. However, Vegas has 1 offensive touchdowns in the last 2 games combined, season low in points and total yards. And I understand that, again, the Jets are a good matchup this week, but I don't necessarily think it's get right. This could be the one time the Jets sneak and get that weird win because it is very hard to go 0-16. So for me, stay away. Look at that. Indianapolis coming up next. Yikes. The Chargers, they should be getting healthier. Yikes. And then Miami. So for me, let's just go in a different direction. Just go in a different direction now before you get kind of that fantasy playoff regret.
Cynthia mentioned the Chargers, and so Justin Herbert, he got a haircut, and things have gone south now. He's a bust, and he will never again score 20 points.
Would you stop? Like, now you've gone too far. To put that on this young, first of all, I know for fantasy quarterback scoring, our standard scoring is garbage, but I will say he scored 16 fantasy points. If the Chargers had actually just had a competent series of play calling at the very end of the game, he should have had at least another touchdown pass, which would have given him 20. He would have 20 plus fantasy points in 9 to 10 games, and nobody would be freaking out. It's like the same thing when you're talking about Russell Wilson. Like at the beginning of the first half, Russell Wilson had a deep ball to DK Metcalf that should have been caught for a touchdown. Like that kind of stuff changes. That should have been a 75-yard touchdown. Those are the small, minor things that happen in games that turn the tide. And I know we just look at our fantasy points and we get morose about it, but Justin Herbert played fine, made a few mistakes, but he's fine. Russell Wilson's fine, so you can calm down. Although one guy who's not fine is Antonio Brown, who apparently retired at the halftime of Sunday's game. Where is this person?
You know what? It was a really beautiful ceremony. Video tributes even from Ben Roethlisberger. No. Oh. Look, this is sort of the life you live now if you have a Bucs receiver on your roster. You just never really know who's going to be the most targeted guy in any given week. Brown on Sunday had 3 targets, which is the fewest he's had in a game since he joined this team. The wheel may spin back around and we'll have another big Antonio Brown game, but you're going to kind of put these guys in your lineup, he and Godwin and Evans, and you're never going to know from week to week which one is going to be the guy that really has the big game. If you enjoyed Overreaction Theater, and who doesn't, you will certainly enjoy the NFL Fantasy Football Show streaming 3 times a week, Monday and Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern, Fridays at 8 p.m. Eastern, NFL.com, the NFL apps, and at youtube.com/NFL Fantasy Football.
Welcome back to NFL Fantasy Live. It's time for my 5. And with week 13 on the horizon, I'm here to cure you of any transafixophobia. I completely butchered that. Sky Decaphobia. That means you're scared of the number 13. With my 5 lucky week 13 flexes. Let's kick this off with number 5. It's Frank Gore versus the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, the OG running back faces a vulnerable Raiders defense that's allowed a top 5 fantasy running back in 2 of the last 4 games and ranks 4th worst against running backs. Gore's touches have increased in 3 straight games, including 17 plus in each of the last 2 weeks. Number 4, it's Nyheim Hines at Houston. Now, Hines has been on a roll since week 10, averaging 18 points in that stretch. His catches per game show his involvement being way more than just a running back, which bodes well as he faces the Texans, who are allowing the most yards per game to running backs, as well as the 3rd most fantasy points to the position this season. Number 3, Sterling Shepard at Seattle. Now, Shepard has performed well anytime that he's been able to stay on the field. He's had 6+ catches and 10+ fantasy points in 6 of the last 7 games he's played this season. That gives him a safe floor against the Seahawks this week, who are allowing the most fantasy points per game to wide receivers in NFL history. Number 2, we're getting closer now. Number 2, Debo at Buffalo on Monday Night Football. Now, he returned from injury and he bounced right back into our fantasy lives. He scored 24 fantasy points, giving him a 12+ points in 3 straight games and saw a career-high 13 targets against the Rams. His 24-point performance against LA last week was the only 20+ fantasy point performance from a wideout versus the Rams this entire season. If he can do that against the Rams defense, then Debo should be able to be a great play on Monday night against the Bills, who have allowed a top 12 wide receiver in 2 of the last 3 games. Drum roll me, guys. It's time for that number 1 spot. Drum roll. Guys, it's Lil Wayne. Not Weezy F Baby. It's Wayne Gallman, as he also plays the Seattle Seahawks. Now, he's filling the void of Saquon Barkley as best as he can. He's had 13+ touches and 13+ fantasy points in 5 straight, along with at least 1 touchdown in every game over that same stretch. Again, here I am picking on the Seattle Seahawks defense, but this matters, especially as we near the fantasy playoffs. Please start Wayne Gallman with ease versus Seattle, who have allowed a top 20 fantasy running back in 6 of their last 7 games. All right, those are my 5 lucky week 13 flexes.
Arc motion, and Taysom Hill off to the right side has Ramczyk in front of him, and he will walk into the end zone from the 1-yard line as the New Orleans Saints take a 6-0 lead. 2nd and goal from the 2. Hill out of the gun. Now they run quarterback power, and Taysom Hill walks into the end zone, and there's still not been a team in the NFL has proven they can stop that play down tight, and the Saints go up 13-0 on a 2-yard run by Taysom Hill.
Let's keep this week 13 train rolling with some higher or lower with Cynthia Freeland. I will give you a projection for a player in a game this week. You will let everybody know if you expect them to go higher or lower than that. So we will start it off with the aforementioned Taysom Hill taking on the Falcons. Now, he's had 2 rushing touchdowns in both of his starts this season. One of those was against these same Falcons in week 11. So higher or lower than 2 rushing scores this week.
We're going to start off with the star. So my favorite, of course, is when the number is exactly right and we get to draw that awesome star on the screen. Why do I think he'll have another 2 rushing touchdowns? Well, when you look to see the projections, you have to know kind of a little bit about what was called. You know what? I have a secret for you. Come close to the screen. They don't have a lot of rushing plays called for Taysom Hill. This is a lot of ad-libbing. I'm telling you this because it's not about necessarily the pass. It's about creating options. Options, especially in the red zone, means not just 1, but a forecast of 2 touchdowns. Okay, you can go back from the screen now, just a little bit.
All right, we'll move on to Deshaun Watson against the Colts, who give up the 4th fewest passing yards per game, just 224. Watson's 4th among quarterbacks this year, though, with 291 passing yards per game. So let's put it at 267, higher or lower?
It is going to be lower. Now, the thing that's interesting here is that when there was Will Fuller in the projection, it was higher, and then we had to switch it to become lower with the new projections. It's not meaning it's not going to be good for Kiki QT or the other receivers. It's just merely a fact that Fuller is exceptional, and now they have to change the game plan. Perhaps a few shorter passes and more rushing yards. That rushing number went up for Deshaun Watson. It's not a great defense to have to pass against. This is a function of them having to pass late in the game in order to potentially upset the Colts.
We'll turn our attention to some running backs, starting with David Montgomery against the Lions, averaging nearly 58 rushing yards per game, but he's coming off a 103-yard effort against the Packers, so higher or lower than 83 rushing yards against the league's fourth worst run defense.
Okay, so I have lower here, but it's not by much. I have 68 rush yards projected, a rushing touchdown. So there you go. Fantasy points are going to be great. 3 receptions and 23 yards. That's still 18.1 fantasy points. This is a function of rushing yards. What happens sometimes when you get a new coach, especially midseason, is they will key in on what we're not going to let a player do. And if you think that the Lions are going to let David Montgomery beat them, that is probably and very likely where they will be evaluating the middle of their defense. So for me, 68 rush yards is about right. But again, 18.1 fantasy points, so you can't be that bad.
All right, turn our attention to Austin Eckler against the Patriots. Now, he's had more than 10 targets a game in 3 full games with Justin Herbert. The Patriots, though, have not allowed 5 or more receptions to any running back so far this year. So higher or lower than 5 catches for Austin Eckler.
Jordan, draw me a star, please. Jordan is so good at this. Oh my goodness. That means we got the number exactly right. 5 receptions is the projection. He has 21.2 fantasy points projected. That's 51 rush yards, a rushing touchdown, 5 receptions, and 51 receiving yards. This is not about New England as much as it is about the opportunity for the Chargers to kind of get things right, get them going. Austin Eckler is awesome when it comes to helping out all of the different pieces. So in order to be functional, he's going to be the linchpin, the key to this game. So for me, those are 5 receptions. That could even be more. It could even be higher than that. It's not the ceiling. That's the median. That's the upstairs, if you will.
Speaking of pass catchers, look at Justin Jefferson facing a Jaguars defense that's given up the 5th most receiving yards per game to wideouts. So higher or lower than 93 receiving yards for Justin Jefferson.
I have 84, which means lower than 93. So the reason why, because you're getting Adam Thielen back in this matchup. The opportunity against Jacksonville, of course, is there. Top 15 wide receiver in 5 straight games. But we're going to split some of the love here with Thielen, who is returning. So it's more about opportunity for everyone. And by the way, 20.4 fantasy points. Don't be too mad at me. 84 yards is still a great projection.
All right, we will finish this up with Amari Cooper on Thanksgiving. We saw him in a big way. He's now had 80 or more yards in 2 straight games. Now he faces the Ravens on Tuesday, so higher or lower than 75 receiving yards.
I have 64, which is lower. 5 receptions, 64 yards, 11.4 fantasy points in this one. I do not like projecting which Dallas receiver could potentially be the short target, the quick pass target. The only thing you know for sure is that Andy Dalton is going to use those quick passes, especially against this Ravens front. So for me, when it comes to Amari Cooper, just keep it nice and meaty in there. Don't expect too much. Maybe be happy if there's the upside.
I tried to go against Amari Cooper and sit him last week. It did not work out for me. I can't project. I can't figure out the Cowboys receivers.
Welcome back to NFL Fantasy Live, and it is time for Breaking the Ranks, and I have 5 players who have earned first-round status for next season. I am like the bouncer of your fantasy draft. I am pulling back the velvet ropes, and I will allow these 5 young men to walk on through. They've got their own private table. Let's start at number 5 with DeAndre Swift, who obviously we haven't seen a full season out of him, and this is just speculation. But when he did start against Washington in Week 10, he scored close to 26 fantasy points. He's averaged close to 18 since Week 6. He's being involved in the passing game. There's going to be a new offensive system in Detroit, so I'm looking forward to what we get out of DeAndre Swift next season. At number 4, Antonio Gibson, a guy who's already come out and crushed it this year. He's had a rushing touchdown in 5 consecutive games. Since Week 7, he's averaged close to 22 fantasy points. You got him in the 9th round last year. You're not going to do that again. He is going to be a first rounder, and I look forward to what he is going to do in the future. And number 3, a guy that we've been talking about an awful lot, DK Metcalf. Yes, I know that wide receivers usually are picked at the back end of the first round. This might end up being the first wide receiver off the board. You can make a case for Tyreek Hill. I understand that. But for me, it's going to be DK Metcalf because he is such a matchup nightmare. 19 fantasy points in 7 games this season. The only player in the NFL who can do that. Good luck getting him in the 5th round ever again. And if you have him in a dynasty league or a keeper league for that, you should feel very fortunate. And number 2, I'm going to go back to a running back, James Robinson. You know what's interesting about him is that every week people are wondering, is this the week that he falls off? Is this Is this where it goes? Like, no, it's not happening. This guy has been one of the best players in fantasy football. And think of who his quarterbacks have been. You can't even probably remember the name of Jake Luton. It was that long ago. But it doesn't matter if it's Jake Luton, if it's Mike Glennon, if it's whoever it is. It doesn't matter. James Robinson is a stud. They're going to have a new head coach next year, a new offensive system in Jacksonville. This guy might end up being one of the top 4 or 5 picks in the draft. And at number 1, let's talk about Travis Kelce. I've been trying to get you guys to do this over and over again. And listen, if you're going to draft a running back with the first 4, 5, 6, 7 pick, whatever, that's fine. I'm not going to try to talk you out of it. When we're talking about pass catchers, think of the pass catchers who are going in the first round this year, like Michael Thomas, some of DeAndre Hopkins, Julio. Would you rather have those guys or would you rather have Travis Kelce? That position is a dumpster fire. And yet every week, Travis Kelce is out there crushing it. Please draft him in the first round next year. And it doesn't matter that Tyreek Hill's there. He's second in the league in yards. What are we doing? All right. Well, that was it for me. That was breaking the ranks. Those were 5 guys who have now earned first round status. And I don't know how to throw it off after this. Just stop the video, I guess. Roll the animation. There it is. There it is.
Thanks,
I don't know.
Let's do some sweat or no sweat, shall we? Talking about some guys who have some tough matchups coming in Week 13, which eventually will start sometime. Anyway, Kimmy, let's start with Matt Ryan against the Saints, who are giving up the fewest fantasy points per game to quarterbacks over the last 4 weeks, just under 4 points per game. So sweat or no sweat?
Sweating. Guys, we've learned this lesson before. You do not start Matt Ryan against New Orleans Saints. They played each other 2 weeks ago, and he only managed 5 fantasy points, no touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. He's been hit or miss for me all season long and not good enough to be a weekly starter on my squad. If you can fade him and pick another guy up off of waivers, I do that instead.
All right, Cynthia, more quarterback talk. Kyler Murray against the Rams, who are giving up the 4th fewest fantasy points per game to quarterbacks over the last 4 weeks, just over 10 points per game. So sweat or no sweat?
I think I'm bone dry. So the most no sweat you could possibly be in this matchup. Why? Because of Kyler Murray's ability. It's not a good matchup, absolutely. But Murray can run away from pressure. He can kind of find those passes. He's got that one receiver, who's pretty darn good in DeAndre Hopkins. This opportunity for him to get right now that he's hopefully feeling better, this will be an opportunity for him to really show why the Cardinals belong to be even higher in the playoffs.
All right, Rank, let's check out these numbers since Taysom Hill's become the starting quarterback for Drew Brees. Alvin Kamara has taken a big fantasy hit. His touches, scrimmage yards, receptions, fantasy points all way down. And on Sunday, Kamara's facing the Falcons, who are giving up the fewest fantasy points per game to running backs over the last 4 weeks. So sweat or no sweat?
How can you not sweat after reading that? How am I supposed to follow that up? Like, there's the good thing about what you just saw with Taysom Hill scoring all the touchdowns is that the Saints have now doubled down by giving the ball to Latavius Murray more. Like, oh, okay, that's great. Thanks for doing that, guys. As a matter of fact, in all the leagues, not many of them, but in a couple of the leagues where I have Alvin Kamara, I've just written him off. I've already moved on to 2021. It's not happening. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. And that's about that.
That's a pretty unique way to pick up 6 points from your wide receiver. You probably saw that and A.J. Brown's other touchdowns on Sunday. But what about all those hard-earned fantasy points that didn't get a little bit of extra TV time? Here's some amazing fantasy points that might have helped you get a win.
Bubble out to Deebo Samuel. Deebo breaks about 5 tackles. Caught by Deebo Samuel. Gonna run right through a tackle. They can't tackle Deebo.
He is an absolute beast.
Takes a shot downfield, jump ball, and that is caught. Tyron Johnson gripped it away. What a play.
You gotta be kidding me.
Pressure at his feet, backing up, in trouble, launches it over the middle, and it's caught by Arnold. What a play by Kyler Murray, backing up, being chased by 2 Patriots. Looking to go deep down that right side. Ruggs has got it. Henry Ruggs burns the Falcons on 4th and 3. What a huge play.
Sprint option action. Mahomes will keep it. He's at the 35. He's at the 30. And out of bounds. Running a little option. I love it. One of his longer runs of the year.
That leads us to our Tuesday's toast. We're raising a glass to some fantasy class. Who are we cheersing to this week? Starting with you, Adam Rank.
You know what? I'm going to start with Justin Jefferson because this was an opportunity playing without Adam Thielen to just take over the gig. Like, you're the guy. Like, you were going to be the man. You're not going to be able to hide in Adam Thielen's shadow. You're going to have to go out there and do it all yourself. And you know what, buddy? You did. So cheers to you. Appreciate all that you're doing.
All right, Kimmy, your turn. Who are you toasting to?
Let's raise a glass and give a toast to Jarvis Landry, the birthday boy. He had his very first receiving touchdown this season. His 8 receptions, 143 yards, and 28 fantasy points all came as season highs for Landry and got him a wide receiver number 3 finish. So cheers to you, birthday boy. Thanks for balling out on your big day.
Happy birthday, Jarvis Landry. Cynthia, who's getting some toasts from you?
You know, I'm toasting Tom Brady, not because he won, because he didn't, but because he showed us he still has the deep ball in that arm. Since week 8, he completed 0 on 19 attempts until week 11. Now, week 12, he was 4 for 7. He had a touchdown, and we're going to forgive that one pick, but he still got it. He's the old man, you know, it's good. He's the GOAT. The nice deep ball's still there. Toast to you, Tom.
Cheers to you, Tom. My toast is to Big Bob Tunyon, who at least for 1 week made us believe in the tight end position again. Maybe it was a bit of an Aaron Rodgers petty party to show Jimmy Graham what he's missing on the other sideline. Don't care. We got tight end production out of somebody not named Travis Kelce. So next week might be the enemy, but we'll always have week 12 with you, Robert Tunyon. Time to answer our Riddle Me This question. Before the break, we asked, who was the only quarterback to finish as the QB1 in 3 weeks this season? A quick hint, it is pending what happens tomorrow. If one of the 2 quarterbacks finishes as QB1, that will change this answer. So Adam Rank, does that help you with a guess?
I'm going to say Russell Wilson.
All right, let's see. What is the answer? It is Deshaun Watson. Who might be having an underrated season considering how he's done. All right, that will do it, though, for this edition of NFL Fantasy Live. Certainly want to thank you all for tuning in and certainly get in your rankings if you can to join the show later this week.